Okay, let's talk about what we mean by division, and then we're going to get into how do we do division. And it's going to take more than one lesson here. So this is going to be part one. I'm going to put a 1 after this, okay? I'm going to use real simple numbers here, as you can see. If I know that 2 times 3 equals 6, so that's a multiplication problem, I could turn it around and make a division problem out of it. I have these two numbers, and you multiply them together, and you get this number. These numbers, by the way, are called factors. Okay? I don't know if your teacher or your textbook calls them factors, but that's what they are, and that's what they'll get called when you get further into math. May as well learn it now. So these are two factors that multiply together to give you 6. Okay? So what division is if you know the number here, and I know one of the factors, it's a matter of saying, how do I find the other factor? So if I turn this around and I say, I know the 6, so that's here, and I know the 3, so that's here. So what is 6 divided by 3? So 6 divided by 3 is like saying, what's the other factor? 3 times what gives me 6? Well, 3 times 2 gives me 6, so 2 is going to be the answer here. So the result of a division problem is to say, what's the other factor? This number times something gives me 6. What's that other thing? Oh yes, 2. So since 2 times 3 gives me 6, 6 divided by 3 gives me 2. But I could also say, I could use the other factor here, you see. I could say 6 divided by 2. Well, that's going to be 3, because 3 times 2 gives me 6. Now this is the way it's sometimes written, but I'm going to show you a way it's written most of the time when you get further down the line in math. So I don't know if your book shows it this way or not, because I'm not an elementary teacher, by the way. I teach high school level math. But this is what you're going to do later on anyway, so you may as well see it now. When I say 6 divided by 3, another way you can write that is say 6 divided by 3. The fraction bar is really a division bar. So 6 over 3, like a fraction, really means 6 divided by 3. And it helps if you know that, because when you're working with fractions, that's what you're doing. You're taking this number and you're dividing it by that number. So I can say 6 divided by 3 equals what? So what's the other factor? What times 3 gives me 6? Well, 2. So 6 divided by 3 gives me 2. 6 divided by 2, that would give me 3. Okay? So this is a perfectly good way to write a division problem. You could write it this way and say 6 divided by 2, or you could actually look at the multiplication problem and say 2 times what gives me 6, looking for that number in there. 2 times question mark equals 6. Searching for that question mark is really doing division in your head. Now, you're probably used to a different notation, which looks like this. What this is really a way of doing the scratch work when you're trying to figure out the answer to a division problem. So it's a way of keeping track of everything and working your way through dividing numbers into other numbers where things don't work out evenly and you have to do a lot of work to get the answer. Okay? So this is sort of a part of the procedure for doing division. This is more of a statement that 6 divided by 3 equals 2. Okay? Or 6 divided by 3 equals 2. Okay, if I have this division problem or this division problem here, what do you put inside the division symbol here? Well, you put the number on top, the number we're dividing into. And then what you put out front is the number on the bottom, or the one you're dividing by. It's the 3. Okay? Or if I have this problem, I would have 6 here, and I'd put the 2 out there. Okay? So now if you do this, here is the procedure for working out the answer to the division problem. The first step is you guess, or actually you think to yourself, 3 times what gets me pretty close to 6, hopefully right on 6, but maybe pretty close. Actually 3 times 2 gives me exactly 6. So the answer is going to be 2. And then you check your work. You say, well, what is 2 times 3? 2 times 3 is 6, and you write it here. And then to make sure that it came out right, you subtract and you get 0. Now you don't have to do all that when it comes out even, because you can just say, oh, I know that 2 times 3 is 6, and we're done. So 3 into 6, dividing 3 into 6, you get 2, and that's about it. But if you want to look at the process, because we're going to use this for more difficult problems in just a few minutes, the process is you first get your best answer that you can come up with out of your head, then you take that times that, and you get that, and then you see how far off you are by subtracting. And what you get at the end is called your remainder, but here it's 0, so there is no remainder. It went evenly. Same thing here. If I have 6 divided by 2, I can say that's going to be 3. 3 times 2 is 6, and subtract, and I get 0. It went evenly. Okay? Let's try this process when it doesn't go evenly. So what if I have 7 divided by 2? So you say to yourself, 2 times what equals 7? Well, it's not going to be a whole number, because 2 times 3 is 6, that's too small. 2 times 4 is 8, that's too big. So what you're going to put up here is the biggest number you can that won't be too big. So 2 times 3 comes close, but without going over. If I put a 4, 2 times 4 is 8, that's too big, so I go 2 times 3. Then you say, what is 2 times 3? Well, that's 6. So these don't match now. So then you subtract. So you start by figuring out the best number you can, then you multiply, and then you subtract. And by subtracting, I'm seeing how far off am I, and I'm off by 1. Okay, so how do you state the answer here? What is the answer if I take 2 divided into 7? Well, there's 3 ways you can answer that question. One way involves whole numbers. Only whole numbers. And that's appropriate if you have a problem where only whole numbers are solutions. Like you're counting how many people for something. You don't talk about 2 1/3 people or 2 5/8 people. You either have 2 people or 3 people, but nothing in between. So if the kind of problem you have involves whole numbers and nothing else will do, then this is the way you would do that. A second way to do it involves fractions. Okay. The third way to do it involves decimals. So if you have had fractions already or decimals already, these would be more meaningful. If you haven't, just stick to the one you've had. Okay? So let's see how we would do this. Here, if I have to state my answer in terms of whole numbers only, I would say the answer is 3 with a remainder of 1. Here's your answer, and here's your remainder. Okay? Let's see an example of this. What if I'm going to have a bunch of people get together and play chess? And for chess, you can only have 2 people. So if I have 7 people that show up, I want to say how many games of chess can be played with these 7 people right now? Well, you can say there's 2, that's 1 game. Here's 2, and there's 2, and there's 1 left over. So that's the remainder. So if I divide 2 into 7, so how many pairs of people can I find if I have 7 people? There are 3 pairs. And so the answer is there can be 3 games of chess, but 1 person has to sit it out and wait for the next round. Okay? So in a chess tournament, these 6 would play, this one would wait, and this one would get into the game in the next round, perhaps. Okay? So that's how this one works. You report the answer as your whole number answer, and then you state what the remainder is, because that tells you how many are sitting on the side. There's another way to do it, and that's in terms of fractions. So for instance, let's look at this problem a little different way. I know it doesn't come out even, so can I change the problem to make it even? Well, what if you looked at the 7 as though it's a 6 plus a 1? And I'm going to use the fraction notation for division here. If I say I'm going to take 7 divided by 2, that's sort of like 6 plus 1 divided by 2. And that's sort of the same, in fact that is the same as 6 over 2 plus 1 over 2. Well, what is 6 over 2? Well, that's 3. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 2 goes into 6 3 times. 2 times 3 is 6. And what's left over? 1/2. So 3 plus a half, and you usually just write it as 3 1/2. Okay? You can either put the plus in there or leave it out. So 3 1/2 means 3 plus a half. So this is where we get the half. The way you actually do it, you don't really do all this every time. That's just to explain why it works. What you do is you go 2 divided into 7 goes 3. 3 times 2 is 6. Subtract, I get 1. And then I write my 3, and then I write 1/2. I take the remainder, and then I take the divisor and make a fraction out of it like that. Remainder over the divisor, 3 1/2. Okay? So if you want to put your answer in terms of fractions, that's the way to do it. So here you could say there's 3 1/2 games of chess, but a half a game of chess is really just one person sitting there by themselves, right? The other way to do it is to take your 2 divided into 7, and if I go 2 into 7 goes 3, 3 times 2 is 6, and I subtract, and I get 1. And you say, let's keep going, it didn't come out even. So to keep going, you put a decimal point and a 0. And when I put a decimal in the problem like this, I have to put a decimal in the answer right above it. So go ahead and put that in right now. As soon as you put this in, put that in. And I put a 0 there, and then I bring that 0 down. And now I divide 2 into 10. How many times does 2 go into 10? How about 5? And so 5 times 2 is 10. And if I subtract, I get 0. It came in evenly. So here the answer is 3.5. And you might recognize that 3.5 is another way to write 3 1/2. Okay? So if I divide and it doesn't go evenly, I can either say what's the whole number answer and what's left over that didn't work, or you can say it's 3 1/2. So if I have a stick that's 7 inches long, let's use these squares here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay? And I can say, what if I want 2-inch little pieces there? How many of those can I get? Well, here's 2, and here's 2, and here's 2, and then there's half of 2 left over. So 3 1/2 pieces is what I can get out of this. Okay? So that's how that works. And 3.5 is just another way of writing 3 1/2. Okay, I think we've covered enough for the first lesson. So what we've learned is, what do we mean by division? It's like taking a multiplication problem and looking for one of the missing factors. One of these times something else equals this number. So 6 divided by one of these is the other one of these. 6 divided by 3 is 2, or 6 divided by 2 is 3. We've learned that you can use the fraction bar notation to represent division. So 6 divided by 3 is 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. And we learn how to use this kind of notation when we're calculating the result, and where we can put all our scratch work as we figure out the result. And then we learn what you do with the remainder if it doesn't go evenly. And we saw there's 3 different ways to handle it. So this is more of a summary. It sort of assumes you've already seen all this before, and I'm showing you all the different things that they teach you anywhere in school about how you do division. Okay? And so far, I just used really, really simple division, 1-digit numbers and things like that. But let's do another lesson where we go into bigger numbers and how do you handle that problem.